It is satisfying. So I'll call the Economic Development Committee of the Fitchburg City Council to order for the meeting for Tuesday, September 14, 2021. Please be advised this is being recorded. I don't know if this is being broadcast at all. Is anyone recording this other than FATV through the Zoom platform? No? The public is allowed to make public comment on any item that's on the agenda. I do not believe anyone is registered with the city clock to comment remotely. Is there anyone in the audience who would like to comment? All right, so we'll move to our single agenda item. Order 16121, order that the City of Fitchburg hereby approves the expenditure of funds from the Mass Development TDI Challenge Grant Program in the approximate amount of $45,000 for the purpose of said grant, which is to target technological enhancements in the city's downtown parking system and to implement accompanying signage changes. And tonight we have Mr. Tom Skorowski, Director of Community Development, to give us some background and information on this.
Good evening, councilors. I understand this set of parking improvements was also discussed at Finance Committee at length previously this evening, so I won't belabor the point. But this grant supplements the grant approved by Finance Committee to implement some whole-scale parking improvements in the downtown area, specifically Main Street and Boulder Drive, in conjunction with the two-way conversion project underway. What this grant and that one together will allow us to do is to implement 2-hour free parking in both of our Mill Street and Putnam Street garages, Putnam on the first floor, Mill Street on the first and second floor, Main and Boulder Drive entrance. And then with our on-street parking on Main Street, this will allow us to implement time-limited free parking in line with what's there today in terms of time limits. I think the Sentinel had mentioned 2-hour free parking. I think it varies according to where you are on Main Street. Some locations have 1-hour free park or 1-hour metered parking. Some have 30-minute metered parking. Some have 2-hour metered parking. We'll just essentially take it from a metered parking situation to a time-limited free parking situation that would mirror the current conditions on the ground. So this grant in particular is called the TDI Challenge Grant, and because Fitchburg's a TDI community, through Mass Development, we are afforded the opportunity to apply for this grant. What a TDI Challenge Grant allows us to do, basically, we can choose a certain municipal policy that we want to change, and they'll award us the grant conditional on setting those policy agreements. So tonight's vote will, certainly be a vote to accept this grant and the amount of $45,000 to fund the signage and parking improvements, but also there is a need to set some policy recommendations. Nothing here would be binding, but certainly a recommendation to remove the parking meters on Main Street and implement time-limited free parking, and then a policy recommendation to have a parking availability goal set. And the reason this came in front of the Economic Development Committee is that we had reviewed at length our 2018 parking study and the associated recommendations earlier in 2020, and we had discussed the parking availability goal. Just in case you don't remember that conversation from months ago at this point, a parking availability goal is a goal that a city sets that says, here's where we want to be in terms of utilization of our parking supply. The industry standard is about 85%, which basically means that we're using our parking supply, but there's always at least a space available per block, so folks can always find a place to park to go patronize their local establishments. So what I had proposed previously in the Economic Development Committee was to set that parking availability goal of 85%, which is the industry standard, but also have some benchmarks leading up to that, because if we do want to get to 85%, and I think at that point we will need to monetize our parking system. It can't be free anymore. We've got to make sure we're using price to limit supply. But to do that, we've got to implement some costly capital improvements, like on-street kiosks, where you can insert your license plate number and how long you want to park in a location, and so forth, which, they're upwards of to $300,000. So when we get to that 85% point where we want to monetize it, we might be a little bit too late. So what I would recommend is setting a parking availability goal of 85%, but setting a benchmark, perhaps 70%, perhaps 65%, where the Economic Development Committee reconvenes to, discuss the need to further invest in our city's parking technologies. And just for reference, on average, with our on-street and off-street parking, we're at about 30% utilization, but specifically on Main Street, we are at 7% utilization at 10 a.m., 24% at noon, 17% at 2 p.m., 24% at 6:30 p.m., and 26% at 9 p.m. And that's from the 2018 parking study, so these numbers are a bit dated, but I'd say the general principle applies. We're below 30% utilization today. So again, we would be setting a goal that we want to get to 85%, which means people are using our parking, and then we can effectively monetize it to control supply. But I do think we should have some benchmarks so we know when we're getting close, we do need to make some investments in our parking system. And at that, I'll take any questions folks might
So
have.
I think just very quickly, Councilor Di, I think one of the goals of this parking plan is to really use parking as a tool to support development downtown, support customers, local businesses, to support development of housing downtown, that we're not going to use it as a money-making proposition, that it's really a resource that we can use to support businesses and to support growth. And the plan is to really effectively manage that, to provide it free when really progress is in its infancy, when we need to provide more support. And then as we're successful and there's more and more demand for parking, we can use the fee structure as a way to regulate it and to encourage availability.
Correct.
Councilor Di Natale.
Yeah, just on the, just for the record, the parking study that was conducted, that did take into consideration the facility that FSU is going to be building?
It did. That was really the impetus for it, to determine how much FSU and the city in partnership would need in additional parking. And they felt that we do have sufficient supply on-street, off-street, and were we to add some additional parking in that location. So part of the study looked at creating a 112 and a 69 unit parking facility there, and ultimately the university opted for the higher amount. I say 112, thereabouts. Basically a structured system in that you have the entry off of Main Street, and then you'll have the Main Street entrance as well, 2 levels.
And so all the money that's made from that garage obviously goes to the university.
Correct.
And the system that we talked about in finance, about the license plate recognition, the mobile, well, this would just be the license plate with the university garage. Do we know if they're implementing the same, so there's consistency when we do it on our 2 garages?
It
Do we
certainly follows with the recommendations of this study that they would implement that, and that's where the recommendations came from.
Okay.
Yeah. I don't know if it'll be the same company necessarily, as they have to go through the bidding process too.
Yeah, I agree with what Councilor Van Haasingen said about, we're not looking to make, I don't want to say we don't want to make money in that sense, but within reason. But the main goal here is to get people down here to utilize the spaces. Secondarily, I would even say it's secondarily the revenue. For me, the revenue is not even in my mind. It's getting the utilization up to levels that they should be, which then indicates that there is a downtown that is attracting that interest in utilizing those spaces. So it's a catch-22. We've got to give people a reason to come down here beyond what it is now. I know we're working towards that goal. My concern is the utilization benchmark of 85% is what we're striving for. How often are we going to monitor the utilization of our garages to make sure that we're meeting, or we're inching towards that benchmark? Is there going to be monthly analyses done by month? How do we track that usage once we implement everything that we're looking to do?
It's a good question. And one of the things that the license plate recognition technology affords us the opportunity to do is we don't have to do a study every time we want to figure out the supply demand, because it does collect that data in real time. So I think we could, conceivably do this, yearly. I think would be a realistic estimate of how we might want to do something like this. Maybe it's even a yearly task of the Economic Development Committee to take a look at where we're at. Maybe that's not a benchmark per se, but a commitment to regular check-ins. I think that would be reasonable, and certainly well within the capabilities of this tool.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor Squalia.
Thank you. I have a few questions. If we approve these petitions and grants, particularly 16121, the specifics that you mentioned, the removing the parking meters on Main Street, the time-limited parking, and the parking availability goal, will there be further specifics to vote on for the license plate recognition technology implementation, the details, or will those details all be handled by the administration?
So if the parking availability goal is voted on this evening, that's probably the last time we would see the parking availability goal, except in future meetings of the committee. The change to time-limited free parking would actually entail an official ordinance change. So we could move forward with the technology, but it couldn't be finalized until we have the ordinance change to remove the meters and move to that system. So you wouldn't, in that case, be voting on the technology per se, but the ramifications of the technology. So this, I think, would be the opportunity both here and then Thursday at a full council meeting, which I mentioned, knowing there's some privacy concerns, I want to try to get as many of those questions addressed in advance of that meeting as I can, because I think Thursday would be the final date to vote on the technology itself, technically speaking.
Okay, good, because a number of my questions were brought up in the Finance Committee meeting, but I have some more questions. So the overview is the current plan is to remove the parking meters, do the time-limited free parking with the LPR technology, and base this on the parking availability goal and a progress benchmark. Until that progress benchmark point, the LPR technology will be used to determine the 30-minute, 1-hour, 2-hour, whatever free parking, and then they will be fined or sent a bill, or this technology will be in place now. Is that correct?
That's correct. And I think this is a technology we would continue to implement. It's sort of a best practice in the industry that we would implement beyond this. Once we do get pay by plate kiosks or other pay to park systems, use LPR as sort of a tandem tool for enforcement. So it's something you can use for both paid or just free parking in this case.
And with the $75,000 funding for the other portion of this that was discussed in finance, that grant, Smart Growth, is not specifically needed to be used for this purpose. Does this 16121 TDI Challenge grant, does this need to be used for this specific purpose?
Specifically for this purpose, and if the vote's not taken to move to free time-limited parking and we don't set a parking availability goal, we don't get the funding. Well, technically we get $9,000, but we won't get the remaining balance until those votes are taken.
Okay, on the questions that were brought up in finance about the storing of the license plate data, I'd like to know if specifically the city will be storing data or if the Intech private company will be storing the data.
That I can answer. It's on the cloud, managed by the system through Ventec. So that's part of the operating costs that we pay, is for them to maintain a secure server.
So the private company will be storing the data?
Correct.
Or I'd like to know how long they store the data and when they purge the data? Mm-hmm. And I would specifically like to know whether or not explicitly this this license plate technology will be utilized for other minor infractions, expired registration, expired inspection stickers, et cetera. I'd like that specifically noted. And then I would also like to know specifically if this license plate data will be utilized by this company specifically for purposes other than City of Fitchburg purposes, if they will be selling this data, if they are able to do anything with this data besides specifically for the City of Fitchburg.
Okay.
On the implementation, if a car, so let's say it's a 2-hour free parking. If a car moves from one parking spot and moves to another parking spot, does it renew the 2-hour, or is it, will they still receive a fine?
So I believe it depends on where they move to. And it's sort of tied to the code, the city code. So I believe it states, it states some bounds by which you have 2-hour free parking from this bound to that bound. You have 30-minute free parking from here to here. It's my understanding, and something we can also look into, if you would be in violation were you to be within that same block that's outlined in the ordinance as stated. And I don't know if that's common practice today for, it might be different because of the meters than free parking.
Are the costs of these violations like a standard in our ordinance with that mirror our fine system, or a parking fine, like, I don't know, $15, something like that?
The violation's $15 today.
And in order to expand your time, say you need to be there for 3 hours, and you know this in advance.
Right.
There's some sort of app program that you need to go on to register your plate and...
Correct. So not for on-street parking, and that's the goal of on-street parking, is to have turnover. We don't want people staying past 2 hours ultimately, but we would want to encourage that traffic to move to one of our parking garages. And so when you enter that garage, if you don't have a permit, you're flagged, but you're given a grace period by which you can get a permit. And so we'll have to implement signage that will say, in effect, you can purchase a permit online, and we can set the parameters, whether it's hourly, half day, or full day. I would, suggest perhaps if we're already doing 2-hour free, maybe we've got half day and we have full day. And you can buy it right there on the app, and then it'll register as long as you're within that grace period, which we can define what that period of time is, but I think generally is around 15 minutes.
Okay. So we're mirroring the existing schedules. If it's 8 to 5 p.m. in an area that's 2-hour free parking, for example, they won't be charged after 5 p.m. Or
Correct. The tool is mirrored to the ordinance.
so like the parking garage, say you park there, for 2 hours, but I don't know, you have to go home in a cab and you leave the car there all night.
Right.
Are you charged accordingly?
So we will not have an automated ticketing system in place, so you won't just get an automatic mailing. Similar to today, it's just a better tool for utilization with our parking staff. So it really is contingent on, they get the violation notice, it's contingent on putting that on your dashboard. So there is that human element involved. It's not completely, artificial intelligence, if you will.
Okay, so you estimated it was approximately $7,000 a year to run this system. Is that with the current utilization, or does that fee increase when, for example, we reach a parking availability goal of 85%, and theoretically there's lots more turnover in parking?
Okay.
Does that fee go up every based on that?
The fee won't go up. There is a fee within the permit manager system, so $1 of the permit goes to the company. So that is one area where they receive additional funding as we get more and more folks in.
Okay. So this parking improvement plan, it was noted it was going to cost approximately $400,000 for everything we want. We have $75,000 from the 40R payment. We have this $45,000 grant. Do we anticipate getting more grants, or do we anticipate using city funds to implement the bulk of this program?
So the remaining improvements would be the on-street kiosk systems and within the parking garages themselves, implementing those kiosks. I think We could conceivably use additional smart growth density bonus payments to pay for this. But in all likelihood, I mean, I would recommend it, and I put it in as a capital expense to budget for in the future, as it's part of our parking study and a recommendation that I think we'll need to implement, let's say, 5 years. I'd hope sooner, but we'll see.
What did you mention about kiosks?
Oh, so of the 400,000, the bulk of that expense is implementing kiosks for paid parking. Instead of, today we have parking meters, but many cities will have a kiosk per 12 spaces. And if you're in those spaces, you go to kiosk A and you enter your license plate. And then, moving further down the street, there's kiosk B that covers 13 through 20 and so forth. So the remaining cost was really that technology to manage paid on-street parking and paid off-street parking, which would be kind of similar to what we have in the Mill Street or the Putnam Street garage today on the first floor.
So this would be kind of a next phase of this
Next
LPR
phase.
technology system?
We have everything we need to do the short and medium term today.
Okay. Will there be specific senior rates for parking or violations?
I believe that's,
Because, a lot of the seniors might not be able to use these phone apps, in the short term, before we have a parking kiosk that they can physically go to. They might not be able to use apps, for example. Is there a way that our seniors can easily go through this system so that they can park, for example, when they go to church on Main Street, they'll park, I don't know, for 4 hours or something? Is there a way that they can get a permit and pay for that without getting a violation?
so I believe today were you to utilize, some of your senior passes that you have today for on-street parking, you would go to City Hall to get those passes through your office, correct? So one of the things we've discussed is that we could at least make City Hall open and available to anyone that would like to purchase a parking permit, and we could walk them through the process if they don't have that technology available. But beyond that, if you're not within the 2-hour limit, that is, I guess, a gap, I would say, and something we could, look into. But ultimately, any fees would go through the standard council process. So approving anything here would not, I guess, disqualify us from taking, some updates to the fee structure accordingly. But I think that might be tough to do.
So maybe the senior tickets, passes that we do now could be implemented into this system such that the senior would go and give their license plate, and their license plate would be in this system with a senior rate or something? Is that possible?
I don't know about the senior rate component.
The only senior pass out is for parking near the senior center.
Yeah?
So, and Tom just mentioned, if they can't, the app or don't want to, they can always come into City Hall and our clerks will help them.
Okay. I would just like to see accommodations made physically at City Hall for seniors to be able to purchase these passes without getting fines in the mail. And then on that note, what if you are using like a rental car or you're borrowing a car, and someone else, I don't know, uses your car or something like that, and you get a fine in the mail? How do you contest the charge?
They're guilty. They need to pay it. If someone borrows your car, they get a ticket. It's a legitimate ticket. It means you.
So you would go through the same process that you do now for a parking fine, a violation? You'd go to the parking clerk, judge, some sort of process?
If they wanted to appeal the ticket, they could do an appeals process.
They could do an appeals process. Okay. Okay, that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Schultz.
Thank you, Councilor Van Hazing. I had a question about the grant, Tom. I listened in on the Finance Committee meeting, and the $75,000, we don't we can accept it and we don't need to use it for the implementation. Now, this grant here, can we accept the 45,000? I think you said earlier that if we don't implement certain features like the time-limited parking, then we're only going to get 9,000. If we don't implement the whole program, can we return the $36,000 to the state for this grant and not have any penalty for doing so?
We could. I think if we did not make those votes, we could return the money.
Okay. Without penalty?
Pardon?
He said without penalty.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Tom.
Councilor Dinatale.
Yeah, Tom, I think the general theme here tonight between finance and this committee is clearly on the LPR, and while it's utilized by other municipalities and other businesses like Mart, it's a radical change from what we have done. And while it is supposed to be more efficient and streamlined, there's a lot of questions and concerns about the processes and procedures, data storage, what we're collecting, what this company is collecting. In this day and age, there are legitimate concerns about even, for me, whether it's legal or not obviously if it's illegal, it matters. But if it's legal, okay, but so what? That doesn't necessarily mean we have to do it, or we don't have to know more about it. So what we're voting on tonight, my fear is by doing all of this, we are kind of we're locking ourselves into this new system ahead of knowing exactly how it's going to work and what it entails. I know you said earlier that when Councilor Squalia asked about the ordinance, let's say we pass these next week, and then we get an ordinance 3 months later. Is it a foregone conclusion that we have to basically accept that ordinance because we've accepted the funds and have spent them? I mean, I guess what I'm asking is that where we are going to have some final say in this implementation, or is this new system going to be locked in regardless of what that ordinance comes forward with? Or is it not going to get locked in until after the ordinance is passed? So I'm trying to understand the logistics legislatively of how this is going to play out. We released this $115,000 of funds between the 40 and the 75. What happens next?
What happens next is we would then initiate work on developing a scope of work with Ventec, the consultant, and developing a timeline for implementation. And then within that timeline, frankly, the earlier the better, so we're not making capital investments. We could go back in front of the council, and I don't know, I guess the one question I would have is, were we to take the votes premature to the meters being removed, that wouldn't be a good thing to change to time-limited free parking and not have an enforcement mechanism. Yeah. But I'm certainly in favor of getting this back in front of the council as soon as possible, whether as a binding ordinance vote or in some other fashion to provide an update. I totally understand the privacy concerns, and I do think I have some answers to and some of them I've already provided, others that I've recalled in discussions with Ventec, but I want to make sure to get it right when I'm presenting it to the council, whether Thursday or next Thursday or sometime in the near future.
Well, why does it have to be next week? The ordinance, how am I trying to say this? So the Finance Committee passed the order with clearly a lot of questions, because we didn't want to hold this up knowing that there was going to be an ordinance coming down the pike. Okay. What I'm trying to understand is, by passing these tonight or in full council next Thursday, prior to that ordinance, the wheels are already in motion. So when the ordinance comes before us, which will remove the meters and will, I would believe, implement this new system officially, legally, that's kind of the last line of defense of stopping this from happening if we want. Question is, can we do that if we're accepting this money right now? Or are we kind of tying our hands to what you're presenting at the ordinance vote by taking this money. Do you know what I'm trying to say? Like, I know
Right.
we have that ordinance vote, but is that just a procedural matter at that point if we take this money now?
I mean, I think with the, it would depend on when I come in front of the council and where we are in the purchase of the capital equipment, which is the bulk of the cost here. You know, if we've already signed a contract and have moved forward with the ordering of the capital equipment, and then I go in front of the council, well, I don't have that money anymore. It's you know, part of the procurement process at this point. Were we to come a bit earlier, before those purchases are made, and at least have that initial ordinance vote, and then, you know, what we could conceivably do is send it to its readings at a later date.
I guess I would, maybe I'm not understanding this clearly, but I guess I would feel more comfortable if, it would make more sense to me than to have the ordinance first, then accept the money, right? Because then we pass the ordinance to say, get rid of the meters. We have blessed this new LPR system and its mechanics. Now it's a matter of law. Now we accept the money. Now you go forward and procure the systems and stuff in place to do what needs to be done. Because the way I'm hearing this is we take the money, we're kind of almost saying, go ahead, do what you got to do. And the ordinance is kind of a formality at that point where there may be some issues with the ordinance that, what if we don't pass the ordinance? What happens? I mean, so I'm not thinking that this isn't going to pass eventually, but just a lot of questions about it. And whether you can answer it or the company can answer it, and quite frankly, part of me would prefer the company, no disrespect to you, just
Untaken.
because they're the subject matter experts on the technology. It's not just the privacy, it's just the mechanics of how it works, so people understand how this is going to work.
Sure.
So they're not blindsided, so their fears are assuaged. They can't say that we weren't open and transparent about what we're implementing, because I'm not so much concerned about the legal side of it, because I know other places are doing it, so I'm not even worried about that. I'm more worried about the mechanics, the data storage, the implications if you are fined, or what does that all mean? And if that doesn't come until the ordinance part of the process, okay, but we've already authorized the money.
Right.
Do you see what I'm getting at here?
No,
So
I completely
I think,
appreciate it.
Tom, if I could just step in and weigh in on this issue. I think this is the problem of this, the ordering the phases is of this process is a little bit of a chicken and egg question, which comes first? And it's part of the problem, because once we pass the ordinance changes to eliminate parking meters, we have no enforcement mechanism for downtown until the LPR technology is put in place. And it's something that takes a little time to get set up. We have to buy the equipment, we have to contract with the monitoring agency, and we have to set everything up. So what this is an intent to basically start the process ahead of time with the acceptance or the intent to follow through. So in your question of, you know, when is the time to say, no, this is not what we want to do, we should really do that now. It's not maybe a legal requirement, but it is a matter of good faith in that we're accepting this money, we are going to spend it. Part of that is to say, you know what, this is the plan. We acknowledge that this is the plan, and we do intend to move forward. And in regards to the LPR technology, you know, anytime you introduce something new, it can be a little scary, but this is a mature technology that is used all over the place. It's not something that is you know, we're not beta testing it here in Fitchburg. This is something that if you go into Somerville, you go into Cambridge or Boston, you use the same technology. Anywhere that there is density of parking demand, it does work better than meters. Meters are an incredibly inefficient way to do this. And frankly, I'm tired of keeping change in my car, and I'd like to be able to do this all remotely. So I understand that some people have some questions about how this works, and we can have some more discussions going through that and dealing with it. But I think we do have to, tonight, or whenever we make a decision on this order, come to a decision of, do we want to move forward? I think it may not be a legal requirement, but in good faith in accepting this money, we do have to say, this is what we want to do, or this is not what we want to do. Is that a good summation, Tom?
I think so.
I think in the Finance Committee, when I voted to move it forward, I had questions attached to that with the understanding about the ordinance process. But now, after hearing more of this, and I know I can change my mind next Thursday, I mean, with your comment, Mr. Chairman, about we probably need to make a decision, this is probably the time we make the decision on the LPR system, and then we get the details more in depth later. While I understand it's a mature system in a lot of other areas, it's not a mature system here, and I myself am not familiar with it. I've heard of it, but I'm not familiar with how it works. Some of us are, some of us aren't. I'm just not. And what I'm trying to communicate is I'm not against this, and I don't want to vote against it, but at the same time, I'd like to get all of these questions and information answered before I move forward with the fund release. I don't think that's a lot to ask.
I don't think so either.
I mean, does this have to be accepted right now, or can we give it 4 weeks, get that information, those questions answered in a formal written document, and then have a presentation on it, and then I'll feel a lot better about going forward with this. That's why I hate these things. I'm not against this. I just want more information to do what we want to do, because I think it's a great idea. I think it's revolutionary, for us anyway, because we're behind the times apparently. There's just a lot of questions about how the system works and the data storage and stuff that I think would be necessary and pertinent to have answered before we release the funds. So I guess when I voted in finance to advance it, my understanding was we would get to do that at the ordinance time, but not understanding clearly that, no, that's not necessarily the case. We are moving forward with this system. If we vote for the committee's recommendation in finance, and if this committee votes yes, on Thursday, we've kind of locked ourselves in. There's no turning back. And understanding that, I may be compelled to be consistent, vote to move it out of committee tonight, because I voted already in finance to do it, but at the meeting on Thursday, I'm going to move or vote not to move it forward, and instead want to hold it, so we get these questions answered. If it's not time sensitive, then I don't see what the issue is. No one on this council who's raised questions has said they're against the system. There's just questions we have because it's a radical change. And yes, I agree with Councilor Van Huizinga. Get rid of the meters. They're archaic and old. If this is the only other way to do the enforcement, okay, I would like to learn about it more before we move forward with the funding release.
Understood. And
I think one question would be, what would be the best forum to do that? Would it be to move this forward tonight and the next council meeting or a future council meeting do that? Or would it be to hold it in committee and have this process, this discussion in this committee?
Well, Mr. Chairman, for me, as Chair of Finance and who already just voted to advance it, I'm not against advancing it here, but I'm going to likely change my mind in full council and not advance it, just to be consistent. But the other 4 members of this committee are not on finance, so if I vote against holding it, it's not because I'm against holding it, it's going to sound weird to people. I'm trying to be consistent with my finance committee vote, with the note made in the record that I will hold this and I will not vote to pass this through full council if these questions are not answered in detail.
Okay. So maybe the best forum would be to do it as a council, seeing how this is an issue heard by both the Finance and the Economic Development Committee, and probably other councils in general may have some questions about it. Is it feasible to have this sort of discussion and presentation by the next city council meeting, Tom?
I certainly think it could be. I'm going to do my part to make sure I have all these questions answered. Like I said, I have a general sense of these answers, but I don't want to, I want to make sure I'm verifying that with Ventec. I want to make sure I'm vetting it with our city solicitor as well. But I'll, do my part to put together a document that hopefully puts you all at ease on Thursday. I definitely appreciate the concerns.
Councilor Fleming.
I was going to say, I wasn't opposed to holding it in this committee. I'm not opposed to it. Just listening to everybody speak and looking, towards our senior community, that if we're not all familiar with this system, how confusing is it going to be for them? And that is of some concern. And a lot of good questions were raised tonight. So I'm not opposed to holding it in this committee. However, if it does advance to the full committee, then I would like a lot of these questions answered. It's a little of concern, because I'm not familiar with it. Especially people who don't leave the city. A lot of people just do everything in their city. They don't go to Boston, Somerville. So they're not familiar with what's going on with technology as far as parking. They know they go, they put their money in. Maybe they throw their credit card in a little slot, but some people don't have the capabilities of walking to a kiosk to put in the information, then walk back to their car, so.
I will say, as a millennial, we don't have coins, so that
yeah,
can work both ways. But I definitely appreciate the concern, and
Yeah.
I'll try to work to have it addressed.
Councilor
I
Giantelli.
mean, I'm very technologically savvy, but I'm more used to going into a garage, pressing the button, getting the ticket spit out, and then when I leave, put the ticket in, and it says, here's what you owe. I've done that a lot in Worcester, Boston, just recently, so I know there's a lot of garages who don't do this. They do the ticket system. My only question is, I know you're saying you can present it by Thursday with all the questions that have been asked. Is there any hesitation to have the vendor present?
I could certainly check with them.
No disrespect to you, Tom, just the actual technology company, I'm sure, could provide really good backup to
No, I'd be
supplementing what
happy.
you have to say, which would probably give even more confidence to us that, we're hearing it from the horse's mouth, that this is what they do.
Save me some work, certainly. I'll reach out to them tomorrow morning.
That's just my opinion.
Yep.
Thank you.
Councilor Squalia.
Thank you. I just wanted to say that I echo Councilor Di Natale's sentiments generally, except that I didn't vote in finance, so I won't be voting for this now without having that information. But I have a feeling it will still pass this, and hopefully we would discuss it on the next city council meeting, and we have our questions answered, because otherwise I won't feel comfortable voting for this then. Thank you.
Yeah. Just, Mr. Chairman, very
Councilor
quickly.
Vitale.
Yeah, and I want to make it very clear that I didn't want to I didn't appreciate the process enough. Maybe my other colleagues in the Finance Committee did. I did not. But, I just want to make it clear that I will vote to advance it out of this committee. But if we don't get those questions answered sufficiently in our next full council meeting, I will not support the recommendations of both committees. I'm going to vote against it. So I just want to make that crystal clear. I'm just voting to move it out of committee tonight, just to move it forward, have the full council look at this, get the questions and answers made, and then make an informed decision at that point. This is by no means my stamp of approval for next Thursday. Just want to
Loud and clear.
Yeah, thank you.
So should we move to amend it so that it has this suggestion?
So I think we can take that as a separate item. So I think first, if somebody would like to make a motion in regards to Order 16121, then we can discuss the clarifying language.
So are we making a motion to approve with conditions? It's hard to hear.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
So I think what's been discussed is people do have some questions about how this technology works, and it's something that we should talk about and resolve. Where this issue is also being held by the Finance Committee, what may be best is to move it forward in this committee, or personally, I feel this may be the best path, so that then we hear it in the full city council meeting concurrent with the similar petition that's being heard by Finance. So then we can listen to a presentation on it, ask additional questions, get additional clarification, and determine whether or not this is the best way to move forward in that final council vote. But where it's being held in two separate committees, in two related or similar orders, it may make sense to move it forward here and then hear them together and decide in council.
Okay. So I'll make the motion to approve here.
All right, we have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second.
We have a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right. Just give me 1 second to jot this down.
So we'll discuss the parking availability goal percentages and benchmarks at the full council?
So the second part of this is, like we discussed previously, that there's a bit of a chicken and egg situation. So Mass Development, if they're going to give us this money, wants to know that we are going to follow through. And while there might not be a binding legal commitment, they do want sort of what we think will suffice as a statement that we intend to accept this recommendation and move to this plan. And this is something we kind of have to discuss now. So one issue we have to resolve is part of it is they want a parking availability goal. Tom has talked about 85% is sort of an industry standard that makes sure that, you try to keep at least one space on a block open so that someone coming to an area to go into a store or to visit somebody can find a space, but you want as many people there. That's the goal is you want parking utilized. That's the ultimate goal, because that means you have customers in stores, you have people downtown, you have businesses thriving. So the idea is that if we can adopt a availability goal of 85%, and we need to give ourselves a little bit of lead time to set up this last part of it to get the kiosks to make the necessary changes to adopt it. So we sort of need a head start before then. And what was put out was either 65 or 70% would give us enough time to work out those details and be ready by the time we hit 85%.
So procedurally, shouldn't this have been tied with the petition that we just approved?
So what I would like is, this is some language that Tom crafted, and I edited a little bit because I can't keep alone. I got to tinker with stuff. And this sort of makes a statement that will be recorded in our report to the city council. At this point where there are a lot of questions, what comes to me, is this something we can make in the city council, or do you think it needs to be in the committee report?
So the reason Economic Development Committee was chosen for this was just that you all had received the presentation and saw sort of the full gamut of the parking availability goal and that importance and how this is fitting into a broader plan, which is why we felt it might be appropriate for the committee to kind of set these policy recommendations. They're just recommendations, they're non-binding at the end of the day. So I feel like the Economic Development Committee could make reasonable recommendations, and I do think this is probably the committee that would want to monitor things over time as we're approaching the benchmark. But ultimately, the language was approved by our city clerk as sort of non-binding language that you could include in the report that would reflect setting that goal and setting some benchmarks along the way. But certainly that could be amended as well.
Councilor Giantelli.
I'd be okay with that as long as, we are going to monitor the progress of those benchmarks. I mean, if it's non-binding, then that makes me a little more comfortable about this. The studies have indicated as such, but to my question earlier about once we begin this implementation and it's online, how do we then track the progress towards those benchmarks? And if this committee will be tasked with monitoring that or getting quarterly reports, if you will, that's pretty good. I mean, I'm not qualified to say the benchmark is not attainable. I honestly don't know if it is attainable because it's a two-part process. You got to have the parking goals, but in order to achieve those goals, you got to have everything in downtown come to fruition. So, you got to have the theater block all done. Everything that we're looking to accomplish has to be just about finished. And during that time, you're hoping to get even more business growth that will elevate the possibility of hitting that benchmark sooner rather than later,
Right.
Or at all. So, we can set benchmarks all we want, but we've got to make sure that we're reasonable with our tracking, because until a lot of this stuff going on downtown is finished, that may be what holds us back from reaching that attainability.
Correct.
So,
And the goal behind the, goal is really to use price to achieve that goal. So right now, we're at 25%, we want to get to 85%. So we're making parking really cheap to help further utilize the supply. And of course, we have to do other things, and this isn't a silver bullet.
I mean, even if we did 50,
Right.
that's a massive improvement. It's double the capacity. I mean, so 85 is the ultimate, is perfection, just
Right.
about. Obviously, 100% is, but I mean, like 85 is really what we want to get for a benchmark. But even if we got to 50 or 55 or 60, it's a marked improvement over where we are right now. So I don't want to just hold our hands here and say 85% is the number, sell that to the public, and then in 3 or 4 years, we don't hit 85%, everyone's going to think it was a failure. No, we're at 50 right now. We were 3 years ago at 25, 30, so
Right.
we're going there.
Right.
That's a mass improvement. That's a lot of cars. So
And I'm not really setting it as an aspirational goal, like that's where we have to get. What I'm really saying is, if we're not at 85%, in my opinion, I don't think we should be charging for parking until we get there. Then once we get there, price is used as a mechanism to control supply. You're correct in stating, it's not about monetizing it, it's just about keeping supply constant. So anyway, so if we're at 50%, I'd say we should stay the course until we get to a further date. But I had said 65 to 70%. I think it would be realistic to have a few benchmarks. Maybe 50% is one where the committee reconvenes and looks at it, then 60, then 70. So we're kind of, once we get past 50%, we're monitoring it over time to see where we're at and what we might need to do in our policy to get there to where we want to be.
I'll move that we include in the committee report the statement that was sent in the email with an availability goal of 85% and a project benchmark of 65%.
So for the sake, I'll just read it out loud. So
Okay.
the committee recognizes that this grant carries with it the conditions to remove the parking meters on Main Street and institute time-limited free parking, which will require a future vote of the city council, as well as set a parking availability goal for the reestablishment of parking fees. In taking this vote, the committee endorses the recommendation to move forward from metered parking to time-limited free parking aligned with existing time limits, following the installation of required enforcement equipment. This vote also serves as an endorsement of parking availability goal of 85%, which includes the progress benchmark of 65%, at which point the city council will consider whether on and off-street parking should move to a paid model of enforcement. So we have a motion. Does anybody second?
I had a question before the motion. Andy, a quick question.
Well, we have a motion on the table. Could we?
I had my hand up before the motion came up, but
We need a second for the motion before we, to speak on the motion.
I apologize, I did not see your hand. If we have a second, we can... Okay, we don't have a second, so the motion fails. Councilor Schultz?
I just had a quick question about the non-binding aspect of the recommendations. Are we doing this because it's a condition of the grant, or are we just doing this because we need to do this to make this process work? Tom?
I'd say both. I think it's best practice, and it also happens to be a condition of the grant.
Okay, that's what I thought. I figured it was a condition of the grant. Thank you.
All right, for the sake of moving things forward, I'll remove the motion to include the statement in the report. Does anybody second?
Second.
All right, we have a motion and second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Councilor Schultz, I'm sorry, nay? Anybody nay?
No, I said aye.
Okay, I'm sorry, with the remotely, I could not hear you. All right, so the motion passes
Move to adjourn.
5-0. We have a
Second.
motion adjourned, second. All right. Good evening, everybody. Thank you.